in the spotlight, because I'm sure it's generated a lot of questions. We've covered quite a bit of ground. And Jana is available online as well to field questions. So putting the speakers in the spotlight this time. Mary?
We'll talk about afterwards because some of the information images were fascinating, but I couldn't photograph them.
Okay, just for the recording, the question was, will the talks be available afterwards? Yes, we're recording, and they'll be edited down, and we'll make them available later. Assuming everybody's happy with that. Any other questions? Are you completely sated? Yes.
I'd like to hear from the speakers in terms of what Brian suggested there in terms of the precautionary principle. Because we're talking about this inertia between research and policy, and how do we get policy to move faster. We have the precautionary principle in Europe. The precautionary principle, by the way, was the first time I read it was in the first National Biodiversity Plan in Ireland. I was fascinated by it, and I realised I was working in that field. And get some credibility as a work. But it got removed in the second one, and I actually did make a submission for it to be put back in, but of course it wasn't. But I do think that collectively we should really push for the precautionary principle to get a lot more airtime in policy to help us bridge this inertia that we have to good research. Because if you think about what it says is, you must adopt the precautionary principle. If there's harm being done, you have to be cautious. So that gets us over this pushback we get that we have to have science, we have to have all this work done that takes a lot of time. And I just would like to hear some comments on that. Thank you. Okay,
again, just for the recording for Jana, the question was basically concerning the precautionary principle and how we could use that to bridge between. I mentioned in my talk the lag, or after Kevin's talk, the lag between doing research and then ending up in policy. And if that takes a long time, then there's quite a lot of harm, or we could be further down the track in installing bad lighting. So the question was, can we use this as a way to bridge or to speed up the process between the research and the regulatory process? We let Jana feel that for now. Have you got any comment on that?
I do. I think some countries are already doing it, and this is what the international agenda is doing, like conventional biological diversity, especially, where they're trying to use precautionary principle for any of the emerging problems related to let's put it from the beginning. We are not able to change the law to any new problem all the time, and we will not be able to have. There's a problem. What is it? Consistent knowledge of impacts, for example, of light pollution or plastic pollution or whatever. So how much research findings we have to act from the political or legal level. This is where precautionary principle is used in most cases. And I showed the case, the judgment by European Court of Justice, and precautionary principle was mentioned there as well, because most of the directives, they don't have specific mention of any form of pollution. Like they just say something in between the lines of deterioration of the environment, like impact on whatever habitats. And this is how most of the courts, by using the precautionary principle, they act towards the new problem, including light pollution. I don't know if I answered the question. It's more like a reflection on connectivity between science and law and policy. But I think precautionary principle would be something what we always have to pursue and use to facilitate the process in changes with regard to light pollution regulations or policies, especially in discussion with the governments.
Thank you, Jana. Kevin, would you like to comment on that from the imperative? Do you come to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a really interesting document that I think was the Joint Research Centre in Europe published a few years ago, in which they asked the question, how often did environmental scientists cry wolf? and they did a big survey of all the environmental issues that had been raised and actually said, how often did they prove to be wrong? Well, and you'd expect quite, that was, actually, I think they found one case out of all the cases they evaluated. And that the challenge, I mean, to what extent does the precautionary principle cover off the problem that actually the issue very often here is not actually how much science we've got. We've got tons of evidence of the impacts of lighting. It's actually the challenge. I think the big challenge here is the difficulty of what regulation is often wanting is, yes, what should be, what lacks, what spectra, when actually what we're saying in a sense is actually pick almost any level and I can provide you examples which actually that will still have biological impact. So where do we draw thresholds and that's the ongoing debate and that will roll along. I'm just not sure that precautionary principle is always going to cover off the fact that actually we need to bring science into regulation and policy faster. I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question.
Okay, just
Sorry.
is that a case for, that we should engage more proactively than legislation or legislators in order to inform that discussion or frame that discussion so that it's going in the right direction?
I'd say yes. I mean, I guess this is where the interface between what Jan is saying and what and what the biological research is saying, and that's a lot of what I think these EU projects are now trying to do, is bring that much to the fore. But yes,
Jana?
I mean, I just wanted to say exactly the same thing, but in other words, basically.
Brilliant. Okay, any other questions?
Well, just one there, Rihanna, too, which is across Europe, has any town or city switched off all lights for 24 hours? Just to kind of see what the effect it would have, how the community would respond. Has that been done?
Okay.
We did Earth Hour a few weeks ago. Is that international?
It is. So just let me just repeat the question so Jana hears it. The question was, is there any known case of a town or city across Europe that has implemented a curfew, basically, so people have been totally without light, and this has been a demonstrated project? I think Hannah's got a comment first or response.
Well, yeah, there was a project called Seeing Stars, I think in Leiden, which is a very nice old town in the Netherlands. And the problem is you can't just kind of turn the lights off without telling anybody that you're going to do that. So it was a massive project in terms of getting the police on board, getting the councils on board, getting like the public on board and generating awareness. So it was an amazing project that and they also had to kind of make it so that there were a few different options of different nights because they wanted to have no clouds when it happened as well. But yeah, it has been done, but it took possibly like a year worth of planning to get everyone on board and everything in place.
And do you know what the feedback was? Was it overwhelmingly positive or mixed?
Not sure, actually. Maybe someone else knows, but I haven't heard kind of overwhelmingly like we need to be doing this all the time versus this was the worst thing ever. But someone else might know more.
Not specifically that one, but I should say there was no.
Do you want to come up?
There was no match timeline. I think one of the important things that people were waiting to see was did there have any increase, did it have any impact, and there was no reports of any misdemeanors. So what we did try and do is actually in Westport we were I suppose not back on the business point of view. The local authorities wanted to assist us, but the business chain was.
Actually, mentioning Westport reminds me, just since I have a captive audience, that we'll be hosting an international meeting on Allen artificial light at night in Westport next year. So end of October, 28th. Okay. There was also a Chrono City. Sorry.
What's happening.
and it's just an hour. And you're also asked to use inside your own homes, natural light or lighting or whatever. Yeah, and the positivity in the community was unreal. So much so that people were saying, we don't need those. What do we have these? It's a small village actually, but they were saying, why do we have these street shops anyway? You know, it's a small village with no much traffic at night. There was no, you know, yeah, basically it was very effective, and maybe it didn't require the types of big permissions and, you know, sort of like huge efforts. So I think something like that would possibly be a way to just allow people to experience it.
There is some engagement with Earthar here as well, but it's a voluntary thing, and people don't always notice, given that the streetlights are still on. And also some of those nights, they're not organized in the calendar, so they occur during full moon. So again, that the contrast is not as apparent. I was going to say, Diana, wasn't there a Chrono City in Germany that I'm not sure if they switched off lights? Okay, we'll come back to that.
I don't remember. I think I don't know about the cities who did the complete switch off except Leiden actually as well. But I know that there are some cuts off partially,
Right.
like Ghent, and it was really faced very badly by the communities.
Can I
Frank?
quickly come back on the Earth Hour, unless it's related? Or...
Yeah,
Okay.
it will be. In the Channel Islands, Sark Island is a prime example of a dark sky island. But there's an excellent book written by Ada Blair called Sark in the Dark. I like the title.
Yeah.
And it's on the back of her research on that whole project, which very well describes the engagement by community and council and how everyone bought into this idea of dark sky environment. Now they're gifted with being an offshore island, so it's good trouble. But the events to which they went are quite extreme, and it's all well described in that book. So just as a point of information.
I think it's a good point about community engagement is important. And
So yeah, I'm aware of the book, but I haven't read it yet. So now this gives me more impetus to read it. And yeah, I think it's also interesting. I have an aunt and an uncle. They live near High Wycombe, and they say that actually down their sort of cul-de-sac they have no street lighting. And the council came to them, I don't know, in the 90s or something, and said, and did a little survey and asked them, do you want streetlights? And they all said no. So I'd love to like go there and knock on doors and do a little survey of like, how did you get to be like this? But in terms of the Earth Hour stuff, I think, again, that in some ways it's an amazing opportunity to say, look, this is an experience and relationship with night and the dark and seeing that in a positive way. But from what I've heard, we've tried to engage with the organization and tried to engage with kind of Earth Day and stuff like that, and they have no interest whatsoever to talk about light pollution, and it's absurd. But yeah,
that reminds me, Clock Jordan is an example here as well. It's Carem's been involved in a project because they're being encouraged to put in light, but they haven't had any street lights up to now. Is that still the case, Carem?
Yes.
Yeah. Mary?
Just very quickly, there is no legal requirement in Ireland to light any road for any reason anywhere. You don't have to light anything. You don't have to light any development. You don't have to light town centre, city centre. There's literally no legal requirement to light anything anywhere. And I spent an awful lot of my time telling developers, don't light pathways, don't light walkways through forests. You don't have to light anything, don't overlight, no obtrusive light. We have a little road off the N11. Tiny little private development, council doesn't own it. It has no lighting on it. This is the N11 in Foxrock. It's one of the brightest roads in Dún Laoghaire. There's no lit, it's not lit. No lighting on it, no requirement to light it. We have some cul-de-sacs off other roads that council does or does not have in charge. We have several roads we don't have in charge, several roads we do. No lighting. Don't have to light. Little cul-de-sacs. You don't have to light anything. You don't have to light anything. The councillors request lighting, the public request lighting. Unfortunately, and this has hit me more than once, and I have had almost toddler level tantrums to say no to this. I've failed miserably.
Toddler,
I
toddler
know.
level tantrum sends an interesting picture in the mind. But there is no right to light is basically what you're
I'm
saying.
saying is there's no right to light, but beyond that, unfortunately for lots of local authorities, we won't get funding for roads or footpaths or greenways or anything without the person giving us the grant insisting on lighting. And I have had lots of talks to the point where I'm a lighting engineer with the council. I've said, I will not take this lighting in charge, you can't force me. And they said, okay, we'll fund it for 2 or 3 years, see if it succeeds, and then we're going to force it on you anyway. And they're going, but I don't want it. You don't, please don't light this. And they say, oh, but we won't give you the funding to make it unless you light it. And they're going, but you don't have to light it, don't light it. But they won't give the funding unless they light it. You don't have to light anything. There is no reason legally or otherwise to light anything, but sometimes it's forced upon us by other government agencies or other EU level agencies.
And this
So-
is a joined up thinking question then.
That's joined up thinking from much higher levels that people on the ground cannot get around.
We had an example with housing. I think passive houses used to be lower, or you wouldn't get grants because they didn't have energy efficient heating. That was changed, but it's somewhere where somebody sits and it's done by committee. But the same with the effects on the environment. We don't always know how it plays out. You may do things with the best of intentions, but the knock-on effects in other departments or other sections can actually be far away from where you want to go, such as the introduction of warm white lighting, or the S to P ratio in the technical term that led to, in some cases, to lighting moving in a direction in the UK, which was the opposite of the intended. Right. The other thing, just germane to your point, is I've spoken to councils and I've been on calls where it turns out people on the council or working for the council were introducing themselves to each other. So environment hadn't talked to planning, even if they were in the same building, and they hadn't talked to, the environmental people about what the long-term plans were, the roads people, and so on, the energy efficiency. We need, there's something I've been asking for when I've dealt with those engagements, is to have a lighting plan or an overall plan so that in both in time and space, there's consistency, right? When someone moves out of their job, somebody knows what they're doing. And that's a problem, that the knowledge tends to go. It's a very arcane field, lighting, really. And that knowledge is built up over years. You get promoted out of it or you retire, there's a huge knowledge gap. Somebody else comes in from a totally different field with the best of intentions, right? Maybe they come in from roads and say, I'd like more lighting, but they don't actually engage with the other people in planning. For instance, so the environment approach, we put LED billboards because it generates money for the parks or whatever in the council. What's the implication of that? How much good have you generated and how much harm have you generated? Maybe you're not actually competent to judge the ramifications of your actions. But I think there is a big issue, even with academics, and being siloed. And that's one of the things, is to try and bring people together and keep this engagement. And coming back to what Jana was saying about the Bruno meeting, Georgia represented Ireland there. There was no engagement, or there was supposed to be someone from Eamon Ryan's department. Why hasn't a Green minister engaged proactively? And I've talked to him, and we can name and shame. With environment and roads under a remit, here's an easy win. Here's a demonstration of good intent. And I think that's, we don't have the staffing in terms of national standards or whatever. We adopt the UK standards, but it's been shown they're moving to warmer white lighting, reduced light levels. We're still behind the curve on that. And because of what way the juggernaut is proceeding, we're causing damage to the environment. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, Jana, please.
Yeah, because I just had a comment on the previous speaker. I heard it not very well, but I just want to add on obligation to lead. I think we have to make a distinction. There is an obligation to lead if we're talking about airports and abstraction lights of the high building or wind energy turbines. So I would maybe have a distinction of aircraft safety lighting and the rest of the lighting. The rest of the lighting, there is no obligation, but if it goes for aircraft safety, there is an obligation. It's just a very nerdy comment on there.
Hopefully, yeah. Karem?
Thank you. This was a very informative session, actually, looking at the issue from wide range of verticals. I'll ask a question and I'll also refer to some of the things about the guidelines and legislation. My question is that, we have all these gatekeepers, people of influence here who would like to do something, and there's a lot of information to digest here, but when people go home, how should they start, or how should they enact? How do you mobilize the community? Because the power of the community is often, kind of below the radar, but that's the real power. For example, when Hannah was talking about the MGS sphere, that was the Stop MGS Sphere community group, did amazing work coordinating, which led to a greater periphery. In the end, influenced members of the London Assembly, brought the evidence to the mayor. So it was not just based on light pollution, because the mayor was also listening to the number of people who are against the idea. So that shows, again, the power of the community in rural context, doing stuff that, such as the west coast of Ireland that we know, or also dark skies gaining prominence. It was mainly because of the small communities, but we're also seeing the power of the small community within the urban context, such as the MGS Sphere, etc. And in relation to guidelines and legislation, we all want legislation. We all want to arrive there badly. And guidelines sometimes, often, as Mary was saying, there's a lot of individuality and subjective interpretation towards going abundant end of lighting. But this is not just Wild West. It works both ways. So if you want to build an argument for darker setting, the guidelines are also able to facilitate that, but you don't ask, you don't get. And that's the beauty of guidelines, not having hard realities. Obviously, hopefully we will get to the level of legislation, but we've seen so many precedents happening, lots of dark sky destinations happening here and there. And they're showing it's possible to achieve this. It's possible to revert the current baseline. And I think in that realm, as Brian was saying, this is also about capitalizing and valuing your existing resources, seeing darkness as a resource to protect. So see your precedents are also important, resource to protect, such as Hannah's, relatives who said, we don't want lighting here. That's a very important precedent to have, also saying, this road has never been illuminated. Nobody died here. Nobody got murdered here. That's an important precedent. So we have to also use these precedents to build an argument that is credible, that's data-driven, that can be substantiated. But I just want to revert back to the original question. Based on all this, if people would go home now, how they should, once they digest all that information, how they should enact on this, how they should just at an individual level leading up to a collective level, what should they do about light pollution?
Putting us on the spot, I should say for the record, Karem is a member of the Dark Sky Ireland committee. I'll talk to you later. So I guess 2 points. I think one is, obviously there's a question of, the first one is the information or the knowledge, and then there's the engagement, getting the right people to know things, right? And then finding the movers and shakers. Is there something that came out, Hannah, from your engagement with the House of Lords Committee? Or any experience you can share on that?
It was
what was most effective? What were they?
Serendipity, being at the right place at the right time. I think people are interested in this topic. It's just that people have never thought about it before, and people aren't aware of it. So once you kind of have their attention, and every person has their own networks. Every person here knows a lot of people in a lot of different spaces. So, I mean, one thing that we could do is you can go back to your organizations and say, and try and organize for one of us to come and give a talk or a workshop to try and see, okay, how can we move things so that more people know about it and everyone's kind of on board. And also not just having these sessions where we give talks, but having more like workshops where people we'll decide, okay, these are the actions I'm going to take. And perhaps in a few months' time, we come back to you and we say, how are the actions going, you know? So yeah, kind of thinking as well a lot about co-production and co-creation and all of these kind of things. So one of the main failures of academic policy engagement is when the academics know all of this stuff and kind of throw it on everyone, and nothing changes. But when you are kind of working together on the same level and kind of figuring out, okay, these are the issues and things we don't know about and want to know about, whereas the academic thinks that they want to know about something else, then that's when things don't work. So again, just kind of inviting people to work together, rather than it being a one-directional thing.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I guess I'm going to be a little facetious. Maybe the academics know a lot about very little, and the other people know a little about a lot. And maybe also to drive it, you know, what are the questions that you want us to address? You know, what's the information that you need? I should say, touch to Dark Sky Ireland, we have funding, you know, under the Community Funding Award to actually do CPD, continuous professional development materials. And I think see that as a point of contact, and maybe videos as a result of these talks as well. You know, what we could go in and do presentations. Is that what is needed? You know, engagement, but having a contact within an organization who will be a facilitator of that. We can't, the same with the communities, we can't impose things, right? We can work with, but we can direct or assist in that. And there's a wide community of people, as Hannah says, who are engaged out into the wider community. And a lot of it is just making people aware and using the skills that's in the community. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Sorry, just very quickly, Tracy Coughlin, Fáilte Ireland. We've been doing some work with Georgia and Dennis and Katrina, and also Mayo County Council around looking at this concept from a tourism perspective. And in 2022, we did some research, and we did a survey with 6 markets, 250 respondents on primary research. And of 27 concepts tested, the dark skies was the most popular by far. And some of the shout outs, I suppose, that people expressed was that it was a truly unique nighttime activity, which combines nature and the outdoors with the galaxy. And they loved the idea of some sort of sky park theme and the absence of artificial light specifically, and the opportunity that that would offer to give a different perspective on a destination was really attractive. And there's a lot more in there. That's all I'm going to share for now, but I can make some of that research available. So we've been trying to move it along inside in Fáilte Ireland and with various communities. So that's what we'll take home. We'll keep the agenda going inside because there is a deep interest in this. And just thanks to everybody involved today. It was a really great conference. Thank you.
Can I just ask you a question in return? I know I don't, do we have any representative from rural development here in the end? No. You know, given that it falls in different remits or people have taken up the baton in Fáilte or rural development, is there a sensitivity about saying we need legislation or we need your department to facilitate our department when you're working in the government? Or is it again, or is it political silos that you're not allowed to raise questions and ask for legislation that would assist in your work and has demonstrable results?
Tricky to comment.
Can neither confirm nor deny that
today, but I suppose we do work in an overall policy framework, and it depends on kind of the hierarchy. And I would just say timing is everything, as everyone knows. And there's never been a better time, I suppose, to move this agenda on now from a tourism perspective, where we in Fáilte Ireland have changed our strategy from volume to value. And we're using the VICE model, but reversing C&E in it, the community and environment, are the priority going forward. So that's a big shift from a tourism perspective. So it's ripe for some type of collaboration across the policy.
Okay, I'm aware of time going. Is it very germane? And you were
policy for educating younger children.
question from the amateur astronomy front. Does Does Dark Sky Ireland have a policy of engagement with younger people? Yes, we'd love to. And we can do that depending on who's in the target audience that we have. Unfortunately, as I said, we are a voluntary organization. There's a limit to the amount of resources. Where we primarily put our resources is to make things available for other people to use and to talk at a higher level, because, for instance, engagement with councils gets an involvement with all the public lighting in an area. Certainly raising engagement, I do it personally. I think all astronomers have done, an amateur as well, have done it in the past. But it's something we can share on. I think it's, we can, if you look for materials, we can help you with that. I think awareness is the key point. If you're not aware, as Attenborough said, how are you going to care, right? So it needs to be a partnership, I think, with you people here, and also with your connections. Who's missing from this discussion? Why are they missing, right? Why did not get representatives at the meetings? We need to take action on a range of fronts, but certainly education is an important aspect.
Yeah, very quick. About 5 years ago, I was invited to review the environmental impact assessment of the Stonehenge landscape restoration project in English Heritage. And in reviewing that document, there was no mention of light pollution or dark sky or night sky. So I introduced that, and to their delight, because it was something that was completely missed out of that. And just bringing my cultural astronomy and archaeological hat to the discussion, if you come to Ireland or indeed Britain, there are so many ancient landscapes that need absolute protection from light pollution, because it is part of the intrinsic experience of these sites. And you mentioned it in another slide now, the engagement by the public who went there was just amazing. But we can talk about Brunavonia, Carramore, Carrankeel, Balgur. There are endless landscapes which need protection.
Thank you, Frank. We've got one last comment, question.
Thanks, Brian and Georgia. Yeah, just it's not another.
Do you want to introduce yourself actually for the record?
Sorry, I should have said Dennis Strong is my name. I'm the Divisional Manager of Parks and Wildlife in Mayo and Galway. And in my work in life, it's an observation, Brian. I just want to say to people, I'm just over 33 years working with the department, and I'm lucky that I live today in the area I grew up in, a rural area of County Mayo. And go back to the question about engagement with kids and education. In that time, what I've seen, and I've reared a family myself, rural depopulation is happening before the very eyes at an alarming rate. 2 rural schools in our area has closed in the last 10 years. The school where my kids went to school has closed. So depopulation is happening, and it's accelerating. The other point I wanted to make is that a lot of people, as I said, I'm fortunate, I'm very lucky to live today where I grew up, but a lot of the cohort of my friends I would have known that moved away to urban areas. But to make themselves feel comfortable, to come back to their elderly parents' homes and stick up floodlights all around them. And that has gone on in our own village. I'm the second youngest person in my village. So it's going in the wrong direction. And I've raised this, and it's going back to your point about this misconception about security. And it's happening widespread. Drive through rural Ireland any night. The football pitches, the GAA clubs have public lighting up, and it's on all night. But I've seen this time and time again with my own friends who I know, and they're living in Galway, they're living in Castlebar, wherever. But they put up these orange floodlights. Oh, it just makes them feel safer. And that's a big issue about misconceptions. And I think going back to the schools, get into the schools while the schools are still there, because they're moving, the rural schools are closing, and kids are being pushed into urban areas as well. It's just my comment. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm afraid we're running tight on time. We do have a light lunch or sandwiches available, tea and coffee. To sum up, do you want to contribute summing up, and from your point of view that you take away, or that we should?
One thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So just one. kind of wanting to end in a more positive note, in the sense in that I think with a lot of these environmental things, there are tipping points. It's no coincidence that the slide that you were showing with all the local authorities which are starting to dim and switch lights off. I think not that long ago that slide would have been a lot shorter. And actually, there's some other ones I could add to your slide. And my sense when I talk to lots of politicians and managers is almost their first question is, has someone else done this? They never want to be the first one to make the change. And that there are tipping points there and that these things can accelerate fast. And I think one of the experiences in the UK at the moment is we are seeing a lot more dimming, a lot of nighttime switch offs, because there's enough examples out there of other people who've taken the step and it's not been a disaster. And I just encourage you that there are these critical moments when things can move fast. And that's the thing that excites me about this and makes me much more optimistic.
Sorry, like that there are really strategic places within Ireland where we can build in those tipping points. And one of them I'm chairperson of the Leaks Park project. Having East Chinatowns, there's an SCAI project on, there's so much money that's been pumped into a town like that for biodiversity, for environment, for energy efficiency. So there's gateway towns in our communities, and I'm working on in Sweden, which is a gateway town to a national park that sees over 300,000 people a year. And I really do think your point is, was what I wanted to say. It's legislation usually follows after enough practice is generated. People have to see it before they will buy it, and I think our gateway towns into our national parks, strategic gateway towns would be the way to go, where there's a whole raft of already projects being funded and supported by the state. And sorry, I am here on behalf of Minister Pippa today, so the
excellent.
Is engaged.
Okay, so just for Jana, the comment from somebody representing one of our Green senators is that maybe the key point is to work through gateway towns, particularly around some of these dark sky areas, and use them as exemplars that other people can actually use and build on. And we've got one more quest. Okay.
Thanks, Georgia. I'll be very brief. Just first of all, I just wanted to say thanks for pulling this group together today. Just thanks to Dark Sky Ireland and Georgia. It's really, really important bringing this group together. If you look at the amount of champions you have in this room for what we want to do, and I suppose don't forget that. I work for the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but I'm not a scientist. I'm on the corporate governance side. So when you're looking at legislation, it is okay to work across departments, but it's a slow process. But there's so much we can do. If we look to what happened in Newport, and if you could replicate that on a couple of other sites and you kind of build it up. And if we look in this room as well, I know we have some of our new biodiversity officers here. That was a huge step to have biodiversity officers appointed in the local authorities. And that makes a big difference. It gives a say, it gives a little bit more power in there. And just a couple of things Hannah said there at one point about working with the communities. This isn't a hard sell. Sometimes the problems with this is we don't know. I would have had solar lights in the garden before I started talking to Georgia. We don't know the damage we're doing. So I think working with local communities, and again, we have the champions in the room here, we can do it. So look, really, really thanks for bringing us together this morning. It was really interesting, really informative. Thank you.
And thank you for that comment. I'm inclined to be, apart from old, I managed to somehow keep sanguine, and things that occurred to me is people like David Attenborough is getting the message out there and being trusted in person, and that's something that Dark Sky Ireland is trying to be. But the other thing, coming back to tipping points, is who thought we'd ever have a smoking ban, right? Those of us old enough would remember that you'd cough and choke your way through, being in a pub. And that was a sea change. And again, once you hit the magic number, then there's peer pressure, right? And something similar happens when we can get these dark sky areas together and we get synergies. And as I said, we're seeing that in Mayo, and also to some extent in Kerry, that, why are they having a dark sky festival? Why aren't we included in that? Why are the tourists going there? And then there's also this sense of keeping people in the community and a sense of ownership. right? This is something you have that you're giving away. Is that what you want to do, right? Do you want to be the same as everywhere else? Do you want to be a mini Dublin? You know, given that, you know, they're saying one of these things now, films are going to look very boring when every city they go to looks the same. It's lit white, right? There's no character, right? But there are things, you know, where we can influence, and you know, water dripping on a stone is one. If we all drip a little bit on the people we know, then we'll make an impression. But I think it sounds like there is scope for getting legislation going on these topics, and maybe one of the things I was hoping to come out of it, and maybe somebody can engage with me downstairs, is, you know, is the way to go around, is it writing a draft and saying just, you know, push this through or amend it, or rather than say we trust our politicians to understand the science. So as an academic, I'm uncomfortable with that, as you may guess. But I think we, you know, again, it's a question of proactive engagement with the appropriate people. So the knowledge and the power working together. Again, I thank you for coming. If you have to rush off, that's fine. I hope you'll spend some time engaged downstairs, and you know, ask me questions, ask anybody questions. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Jana, for your involvement. And before we go, I'd just like to say they're not here, but thank you to, because he's going to be listening to the recording. Thank you to Alan O'Mara, who's done the IT support and kept everything running smoothly. He'll edit the video. Thanks to Ken and Gemmer for organizing the other details and providing the teas and coffees. And thank you for coming. Thank you, everyone.